So I'm calling it Method in the Madness, Benevolent Non-Interference and the Alien Agenda, although the original title of this was The Prime Directive and the Problem of Evil. So depending on whether you're a Shakespeare nerd or a Star Trek nerd, you can pick your favorite title. I'm going to start with a little bit of a meta-conversation about talking about these topics in academic conversations. UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, that's the word that has mostly replaced UFO. NHI, non-human intelligence, has replaced aliens. And by and large, in academic circles, if you try to talk about these things, you're just going to encounter a baseline dismissiveness. Most people don't think these are topics worth paying attention to at all. That has begun to change as the U.S. government has admitted more and more that there do seem to be strange objects in the sky, at least, that are behaving in very unusual ways. And as a result, there have been some academic folks starting to talk about things, although for the most part, they're just kind of justifying the topic. And my previous attempts to talk about these things have largely been in this space. Here's why you should be paying attention. If you are paying attention, then maybe you're going to try to figure out what's been going on, just trying to get clear about what the historical facts are. Lots of things have been alleged, and it's not clear which exactly of those things are true. But of these three topics, I'm going to do essentially nothing tonight. I'm much more interested in trying to figure out what it means. So the methodology here is for me to go through some trends in UAP and NHI reports just as a kind of data set that we're going to use to speculate with. I'm a philosophy professor by training, so we're used to speculating a lot. I actually do think that all the cases we're going to discuss here are interesting cases that have pretty strong evidence for them. I'm inclined to think that they actually did happen, as discussed, but that's not really the point of them. We're going to use them as just kind of a baseline for speculation. I also do want to say quickly that although I'll give a series of cases, I am cherry picking the ones that I think are the best ones. There are lots of cases, thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. So, anyways, let me just talk to you about what the trends are, and then I'll go through them a little more slowly. So I take it that there has not been open contact. I'll explain what this means in a minute. Although there have been a series of events that involve revealing the presence of these beings. They've demonstrated a certain amount of power over our military capacity. They seem to be studying and altering our bodies, and they seem to be expressing concerns over the environment. When I say there's no open contact, I mean nothing like this has happened, right? So this is a scene from Independence Day, right? Like a giant mothership hovers over every city. Everybody can go out and see it or take pictures and send them to their friends, right? This kind of hard paradigm-shifting event that would force everybody to realize that something was going on hasn't happened. That being said, they have been doing things to reveal their presence, it seems. And I'm going to start out with what is now probably my favorite case, which is the series of events that happened in the summer of 1952. This is a photograph taken on July 16th by Shell Alpert, who is a Coast Guard photographer. You can see the kinds of objects that we're talking about here, these kind of flat, glowing objects, but very importantly, multiple of them flying in formation. But there were a ton of these things that appeared over the course of a couple of weeks, and there's one night in particular, July 19th of 1952, when Harry Barnes, who was an air traffic controller, detected 7 objects on radar over the White House and the Capitol building. And he called out to pilot Captain Pierman to go and see if he could see anything. And Pierman did. When he arrived in the area, he saw 6 objects, white, tailless, fast-moving objects, and he observed them over a 14-minute period. I'm going to read you a quote here. This is from the Barnes, the radar operator. Each sighting coincided with a radar pip we could see near his plane. When he reported that the light streaked off at a high speed, it disappeared on our scope. So this is what makes this case so very interesting. We have multiple objects, in fact, over the White House, picked up on radar, confirmed visually, 2 different parties, actually more than 2 different parties. There are also people on the ground who saw them. And then correlation is like this. So when one of them streaks off, it also disappears on the radar. I take it that this is very strong evidence. Some people like to pick on the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the ARROW report that recently came out, claiming that there's no interesting evidence, and this is just obviously and clearly false. Cases like this need to be analyzed much more carefully. We should note that there's a really lovely, like a 2-page comic that shows this, and I just want to show it to you because one of the things we can see from this is a trend in UFO reports, which is that these objects seem to be able to pull off very, very unusual maneuvers, essentially right-angle turns or complete reversals of flight. That is, to just be going one direction and then stop and go the other direction. This is what was reported both on radar and also with the visual confirmation. You would think that if we had flying saucers, strange objects flying over the White House, the military would have to say something about it, and it did. On July 29th, 1952, Major General John Samford, who was the Air Force Director of Intelligence, gave at that point the largest Pentagon press conference since World War II. And the rhetoric that he uses is essentially the same rhetoric that the U.S. government has used ever since, which is essentially to say, there were lots and lots and lots of cases, thousands and thousands of cases. People keep saying they see things. Almost all of them can be explained away as balloons and swamp gas or whatever. There are some interesting cases that we haven't been able to explain, but we're pretty sure they're not a threat. And that's basically how the rhetoric works. So it's recognizing that there is this set of classes, this set of events that cannot be explained, and then trying to make you not worry about them very much by suggesting they're not a threat. Let me just read a quote from this interview. This interview is recorded and you can watch it. A certain percentage of this volume of reports have been made by credible observers by relatively incredible things. It does not contain any pattern of purpose that we can relate to any conceivable threat to the United States. And essentially the public-facing opinion of the Air Force has always been, it's not really worth our time. Obviously, we're worried about national security, and inasmuch as these things are weird and not a threat, we don't need to worry about them. I like this case for its own sake. Obviously, you can see, I hope, why it's interesting for its own sake, but it's become more interesting recently because of the work of a physicist named Beatriz Villarreal, who's a friend of mine now, well, friendly, we've talked about these things a few times, because she was doing some work on what she's calling astronomical transients, which she was not looking for UFOs. What she was doing was looking through old film scans from places like Palomar Observatory of astronomical objects, trying to see if any of them either appeared or disappeared or both. That's what makes them transient. You can imagine any number of reasons why you would be curious about this. Perhaps a star blips out, or there's some kind of a gamma ray burst that would produce some kind of an image. And she's using old plates because this is before there are any artificial satellites in the sky. So if you were to find something that blips in and out, that would be interesting. Did she find an object or any objects? Yeah, she found them, but they weren't singular objects. They came in clusters. So you would find on one plate, the thing circled in green, a whole series of objects that are there and then gone in the next plate. And these plates are exposed roughly, I think it's 50 minutes or so 50 minutes. So over the course of about an hour, a whole bunch of things appear and then they disappear. There's also, there's a number of times when she observed this, and one is very important because it was the day before that press conference I just mentioned, so the tail end of this wave in the summer of 1952, when you can see these objects that appear and then disappear. Again, anybody who says there is no evidence is just not actually looking at what the evidence is. As I say, so they're kind of there. This is just them flying over. Have they ever done anything? Allegedly, yes. So there have been a number of cases where they seem to be demonstrating power over our military capacities. Many of you, I hope, know about these 3 videos that were released. They were originally denied by the Department of Defense that they were not legitimate videos. And then as Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon in particular worked at the New York Times, they did eventually say, yes, these are real videos that were taken by Navy pilots as part of this program, which is called ATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. That program was run, or at least heavily influenced by this guy, Lou Elizondo, who's been mentioned here a few times today. He's been making a lot of noise lately because he just published a book with approval from the Department of Defense. I'm going to appeal to the authority of Lou a few times tonight, and then I'm going to disagree with Lou at the end, which should be fun, because you're allowed to disagree with people who you respect. Lou has, the reason I want to appeal to his authority is because he has a track record now of being able to say, hey, here's something that's happening, the Department of Defense will deny it, and then as more and more information becomes available, it turns out that he was telling the truth. So I place quite a lot of credibility in the factual claims that Lou Elizondo makes. This is an event that happened in 1964 at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Robert Jacobs was a U.S. Air Force first lieutenant, and he claims that he was filming a nuclear missile launch test. It was not a live missile. It had a dummy warhead on it. But his claim is that when it was flying, he saw a saucer-shaped craft intercept, shoot a beam of light at the warhead, and destroy it. And then he claims that the CIA confiscated that footage, and he was told not to talk about it. Now, to date, nobody in public has seen this, but Lou Elizondo said a couple of weeks ago that he has. Right? So he says that the video is real and that he has seen it. I do not have the video, but I do have a reproduction of the video. So let me just show you briefly what this video is supposed to contain. Yeah? In addition to being demonstrating power over our military capacities, there's other kinds of things, disabling jets and stuff like that has happened, but obviously shooting down a nuclear missile or an apparent nuclear missile is a pretty big deal. In addition to that, they seem to be interested in studying and, as I say, sometimes altering our bodies. This is going to bring us into the abduction cases. This is my favorite abduction case, November 1975, Travis Walton. He was a lumberjack. He was out, not alone, but with friends of his, 6 friends of his. And the claim that they make is that they saw a saucer-like object, he approached it, he was shot with a beam of light, he was lifted off the ground and taken away. He was then gone for 5 days. The local police tried to find him, and they didn't. He did return. All of these parties have stuck to their stories. They've been polygraph tested. And another thing that's interesting about this case is that he remembers at least some of what happened to him being taken to a craft. He was on a table. He saw these beings that correlate with what we would normally think of as an alien. A lot of these abduction accounts are forgotten by the people who have them unless they are recovered through hypnosis, and that's not true in this case. This is a natural memory case, which is another reason why it's important. Now, in the Walton case, there was not apparently any physical traces in his body, but there are other cases. So, for instance, Lou Elizondo, in an interview just a couple of weeks ago with Ross Coulthard, says that he has held this object, which is a metallic object, wrapped in some kind of an organic, fleshy kind of material, presumably as some kind of a shield to keep the body from rejecting it. And Elizondo's claim is that the medical personnel who tried to remove this from, it was a U.S. service member that had this implanted in them, that this thing moved when it was trying to be removed from the body, tried to evade being removed from the body. And then another trend among people who claim to encounter these beings is that there is concern about environmental degradation. My other favorite case is the Ariel School case from September 1994 in Zimbabwe, where 62 young children were out playing without supervision because the staff were inside in a staff meeting. And when they saw multiple flying saucers, one of them landed. Out of that came beings that looked like this, according to their drawings. They were wearing black jumpsuits. And several of the children reported that when they saw them, especially when they looked into their eyes, they got an impression of the dangers of destroying the environment. This was one of the cases that was studied by John Mack, the psychiatrist from Harvard, who interviewed a number of experiencers. And that trend of people seeing these things and then looking into their eyes and sensing some kind of communication, ideas appearing in their mind that feel like they're coming from the other being. This is another trend. Another thing that's interesting about this case, and then we'll stop talking about cases, is that all these children are now adults, and they are also stuck to their case. Right? They continue to say that they were not lying, that this was an experience that they remember, and it was formative for them as they've grown up. So I'm just going to use this, as I say, as a working assumption. I'm not claiming to have proved any of these things. I'm just saying this is kind of a scope and some good evidence versions of these types of cases. This is what I want to assume. At least some UAP are physical craft of non-human origin that intentionally engage with humans as described in these cases. There could be more going on. In my view, there probably is more going on. There's lots of other hypotheses on the table. Interdimensional beings. Some people like time travel. I don't like time travel. We could talk about that. But there might be parallel universes or something like that. going on. I'm just going to stick with this as our basic assumption for the time being, that at least some of them are physical craft that are created by humans, or sorry, not humans, created by non-humans from some other place. Which just leads me to the question that I actually care about. Who are the neighbors? I like to use the word the neighbors. I think calling them aliens is also a valid thing to do. Alien, of course, just means other. But I try to spend actually probably too much time now pondering what it means if we're not alone here. That means that we have neighbors, really important neighbors who have a lot of power, it seems. They have the capacity to disable our weapons and make right-angle turns and fly in and out of places at will. And they seem to be acting somewhat strangely, right? You might expect them to do the open contact scenario, but they haven't. So what are they doing and why? That's what I really want to try to understand as best we can. I want to note right away that this is going to be an extremely difficult task, right? It is true that scientists are currently and literally beginning to learn how to speak whale. So these are humpback whales, and there are various scientists who are experimenting with sending signals, the kind of song, clicking sounds that the humpbacks would make, and they're starting to be able to get responses. We have no idea what they're saying, and it's very difficult to even imagine how we could figure out what they're saying, right? Because when we encounter other humans who speak another language, we have this common biology, common basic psychology. We can point at things and say this is a table, and then they say their word for table, right? It's difficult to imagine how you could do such a thing with a humpback whale, right? And again, humpback whales share an evolutionary history with us in a lot of ways. Of course, they're mammals. They live on the same planet with us. So even this is going to be a difficult task for us to try to make it through, trying to understand what whales might be saying. So if we're dealing with something radically different from somewhere else, then it would be perhaps extremely difficult to understand what they're doing. So I'm just going to make two assumptions: that they are in fact intelligent agents, that is, that they are beings who act for reasons. And intelligent agents have interests, which means that things can be good or bad for them. Roughly speaking, if you have an interest in a thing and it happens, that's good for you. If you have an interest in a thing and it doesn't happen, that's bad for you. Right? Also, I'm going to assume that the capacity to create and use UAP-type craft requires substantial cooperation. So they can't be entirely loners. It takes a period of time and concerted effort over history to mine things and understand how they work and build technologies out of them and share that information across generations in order to learn the science to build a thing that can get you across wherever they're coming from. So they're intentional beings with interests, and they are collaborative in various ways. I still think we could be dealing with a rather large spectrum of types of beings. In particular, I'm interested in this egoism to collectivism spectrum. So on this end, we're going to put absolute egoists. This would just be beings that always act only in their own interest. And over here, we're going to put total collectivists. That is, beings that always act in the interest of the collective. This is going to be something like alligators. I don't actually know a whole lot about alligators, but alligators are relatively egoistic kinds of things. Apparently, they also do nest together sometimes, but you can kind of imagine really advanced alligators on this end. And on this end, I want to imagine these very collectivist beings like ants, although I don't want it only to be ants because I don't want them to be speciesist, so let's imagine some combination of ants and bees working together to take care of each other despite their differences and things of that sort. Humans, I take it, are somewhere in the middle. I do not mean this to be to scale, so I'm not suggesting we're exactly in the middle, but it's pretty this way. So humans are in the middle. We're something like selective altruists. That is, sometimes we do act egoistically. Sometimes I will do things only for my interest to the exclusion of the interest of others. But sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I might undertake personal sacrifices for others who I care about. Generally speaking, our most altruistic tendencies are exhibited in family kinds of contexts, clan kinds of contexts, the us versus the them, right? We have a long history of theming and then not taking care of the other, right? But we do also have a long history of coming alongside the us. And of course, one of the great challenges of humanity is trying to broaden the us so that we can see people who look different from us and have different cultural contexts and things like that as part of the us. Okay, so there's this spectrum of possibilities, and we need to ask, can we learn anything about where these beings are on this spectrum of possibilities? It seems pretty clear that if you had really hyper-advanced ants, that they could work together to collect all this information and build technology and get across space. That seems pretty straightforward. spacefaring ant beings seem to make sense to me. It's less obvious that you can have spacefaring advanced alligators. After all, as we said, you need to have some kind of cooperation. I, of course, do not take this to be literal, but science fiction can be helpful, right? The predator culture, as described in those movies and comic books and the whole predator-based fictional universe, seem to be a good example of what this might look like. They're sort of like super libertarians, right? They're just like going at each other, and like whoever gets to compete gets ahead. And so you might imagine that this kind of competitive environment, when they run the game theory, and right, it's a prisoner's dilemma, and so then they're like, hey, as long as we cooperate, in this case, we both get ahead. And maybe something like that could lead to some kind of successful spacefaring, dimensional transiting kind of society. All right, good enough. So that's kind of a baseline range of psychologies, but you might want to ask this question: are they good? And I want to do what philosophers always do, which is just to say, well, that depends on what you mean by good. And the concept good is messy and difficult to parse. Generally speaking, when we're talking about each other, we're using the concept of moral goodness. I'm not going to try to define what moral goodness is. This is a task that philosophers have been undertaking for as long as there have been philosophers. But in a nutshell, when I see someone who is doing kind things and taking care of others, and I say that's a good person, this is the kind of goodness we have in mind. You see someone who's cruel and selfish, and I say that's a bad person, this is the kind of goodness that they lack. Now, one problem that we're going to run into pretty quickly is that our moral concepts, the ones we deploy on a day-to-day basis, aren't really well built for talking about things that have radically different kinds of natures. So, for instance, you might think that, that you see an alligator and you're like, alligators, they're real jerks, right? That alligator is my baby and I hate that alligator. But it would be weird to kind of blame the alligator, right? It's not that the alligator was guilty and that it should have known better. It's just that your baby was delicious and they were hungry, right? And they're just kind of ego machines. Likewise, you shouldn't think that ants are praiseworthy. It's not like they're kind and compassionate. They're just very different kinds of beings that work collectively in these ways. So it's not clear to me that you even can deploy ordinary moral concepts like blameworthy and praiseworthy when you're talking about something that has a radically different kind of psychology. Now, that being said, I have wondered for many years how you could engage in a kind of moral light critique of beings with radically different psychologies. And I suspect that something like Immanuel Kant's work, universalizability, normative consistency, is something that we could appeal to. So, for instance, minimally, you might think that beings need to be rational. That is, they need to be consistent in whatever their values are. We might not be able to figure out what their values are, but they should at least be consistent with them. So if, for instance, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off and you shake your fist at them, you're such a terrible driver, you should treat yourself the same way, that you should take that as a reason for you not to cut beings off, right? That's this kind of normative consistency. Then the problem is that there's going to be likely more than one internally rational value system, right? That is, there's probably many different sets of rules that you could inhabit and hold consistently, and they could be pretty different from each other. So we'll go back to our little spectrum here, right? You could imagine that the kind of absolute egoists are like, well, we're all going to try to get ahead, and I don't expect you to be nice to me. I'm not going to be nice to you. So when you stab me in the back, that's what I expect. I don't resent you for it. I don't blame you for it. It's just kind of normal, given that this is the way we are. So there wouldn't be a critique involved there. You could imagine a kind of consistently held egoism. On this end, you could imagine beings who are kind of constantly giving to the other, and then they would be very perplexed at anybody who was trying to take care of themselves to the exclusion of the collective. This is not even really hypothetical, because in human actual philosophy, we have real philosophers that are kind of along this spectrum. So Ayn Rand is an ethical egoist. She really does suggest that the best way to be a human is to act selfishly, and that all of us will be better off if we each just act selfishly. And then you have somebody like Peter Singer, who's a pretty consistent utilitarian, who has very little kind of value placed on individuality as opposed to the collective. And, in situations where it's going to be in the interests of many, you should give up whatever interests you have. So we already see in the actual philosophical history of humans quite a range of views here. And one of the things that's interesting if you study these things is It's very difficult for people of these different kinds of philosophical perspectives to persuade each other. They can understand each other, but they generally can't persuade each other. Again, because they're being consistent, right? Like one of the ways that you engage in moral critique with someone who has a different view from you is you kind of take what their values are and you show them that they're being inconsistent. But in this case, maybe they aren't actually being inconsistent, and then it would be very difficult to try to make any progress in those kinds of conversations. So I'm going to set aside the concept of moral goodness. It remains very interesting to me in what ways we might be able to engage in moral critique, either positive or negative critique, of a being with a radically different kind of psychology. But minimally, we can look at how they relate to us, because we have interests and we know what those are. So what I want to do is consider possible motivations that the neighbors might have, and I'm just going to define them in relationship to our interests, since that's something that we understand. So I'm going to use two dichotomies here between non-interference and interference. Here's two ways they could act. They could just leave us alone, or they could get involved in various ways. If they get involved, they could get involved egoistically or altruistically. All I mean by this is in zero-sum situations, that is, sometimes there's situations where we can both win, but that's not what's true in a zero-sum situation. In a zero-sum situation, in order for one party to win, another party must lose. So in a zero-sum situation, egoists will always act in their interest and never in the other's interest, whereas an altruist will at least sometimes sacrifice their own interests for others. Okay, so we have these kind of three basic groups, the non-interference types, the egoistic types, and the altruistic types. And I want to build out of that three archetype beings. So I want to think about three kind of core psychologies that you could build if these were the only kind of motivational structure embedded in those beings' behavior. So we have observers, these are consistent non-interferers. We have exploiters, these are consistently interfering and egoistic. And we have what my wife calls busybodies, consistently interfering and altruistic. All of these make sense, right? They have their interests, we have ours. Their interests are either just totally orthogonal to ours, so they don't bother with us at all, or they exploit us, or they help us. The problem is that the neighbors in their actual behavior don't seem to fit any of these archetypes as pure archetypes. If they were pure observers, they would be more careful about their interactions with us, so they wouldn't be so visible in the sky. They wouldn't appear to children in Zimbabwe, and things of that sort. If they really wanted to be pure observers, they're doing a bad job. Pure observers shouldn't fly in a brightly lit formation over the capital of the United States. Right? Pure exploiters would be more obviously exploitative. So remember, these beings have a tremendous amount of capacity that we don't have the power to stop. They can do these right-angle turns and reverse directions and disable technology and stuff like that. Which means if they wanted to exploit, they shouldn't really have any constraints on exploitation if all we were dealing with was an exploitative value system. Sometimes people suggest that if aliens are here or if the neighbors are around, they wouldn't care about us. Kevin Nuth said something about this earlier, and I agree with him, that this planet is awesome. Earth is a planet rich in resources. We have a huge amount of water. We have a really kick-ass magnetic field. We have a relatively stable atmosphere because of that magnetic field. As a result of that, we have a huge amount of biological diversity, which has existed for a very long period of time. As a result of that, we have a huge amount of cultural diversity that has developed out of our species. And as a result of that, we make all kinds of cool stuff. There's got to be something that the exploiters would want to exploit. You could take it home and share it to your friends and show it off to your buddies and hang it over your mantle or whatever you do if you're a neighbor from wherever you are. It seems like there's lots of ways we could be exploited, and if we look, they could take anything they wanted. They would be unchecked by our feeble attempts to stop them, and they don't seem to be doing this. Right? There does not seem to be just rampant exploitation. They are also not busybodies. They could be more obviously helpful than they are. They could, for instance, stop wars, relieve famine, cure diseases, things of this sort. So I don't think we're dealing with any of these three archetypes. What I do think we're dealing with is something like this. What we observe appears to be a default policy of non-interference with certain exceptions. So they're not entirely disinterested. They're not merely observers. They are non-interfering, but in certain cases they will interfere. This we see in fiction as the prime directive. So in the Star Trek universe, there's this thing called Star Trek Command General Order 1. It's essentially a non-interference directive designed to respect the natural development of alien cultures by limiting external influence. First contact, or in my terminology, first open contact, is postponed in the Star Trek universe as long as possible, usually until the development of warp drives that allow faster-than-light travel. So the idea is, what is valued by the Federation is allowing these cultures to develop entirely on their own, or not entirely on their own, but almost entirely on their own. And the only time you would intervene with them is when it becomes necessary to do so for one reason or another. Like, for instance, they're about to develop warp drives, and they're going to show up and realize you're there anyways, so you might as well go introduce yourselves. So I'm just going to define the Prime Directive as benevolent non-interference with principled exceptions. Now, if you were to follow a Prime Directive, you would run into a couple of problems. And in the narratives of the Star Trek universe, you see these things all the time. One is you would have to forgo positive outcomes. So if you were to engage in open contact with this other group, there would be any number of benefits. For instance, you could have cultural exchange with them. You could share music and food and ideas and philosophy and things like that. There could be various diplomatic and economic relationships. Maybe we could engage in trade. We could work together to stop the bad guys. We could work together to do science. There's any number of reasons that we might be able to benefit from mutual collaboration. You're going to have to forgo all those outcomes if what you're going to do is follow the Prime Directive. You will also be required to allow negative outcomes. That is, you're going to have to let wars and conflicts happen that you could stop. You're going to have to allow for poverty and disease that you could cure. You're going to have to allow natural disasters that maybe you could fix, or minimally you could evacuate people from, and you're going to have to allow all that to happen. Which brings us to the problem of evil, because this is my home territory, thinking about the philosophy of religion. The problem of evil is something about which a huge amount has been written right in this neighborhood. How come God, if God's so good and all-powerful and all-knowing and all that kind of stuff, how come so much bad stuff happens? Right? Let me just go very, very quickly over this. So this is from Abrahamic monotheism. This is like Judaism and Christianity and Islam. Essentially, they believe that God is perfectly good, which you would think means that God disvalues all evil. God is all-knowing, so God knows of all evil. God is all-powerful, so God could prevent people's cell phones from ringing in the middle of the talk. So God is able to prevent all evil. And this would lead to some kind of an expectation that if God exists, there shouldn't be any evil. But there is evil, so that counts as evidence against God's existence. Now, this is a very famous argument. Like, literally tens of thousands of pages have been spent trying to talk about this, whether or not it counts as evidence against God. If so, how strong it is, and if it's possible for people who believe in God to reply in some way. There have been so many replies proposed that there's a special name we have for this in philosophy. It's called a theodicy. A theodicy is any attempt to respond to the problem of evil by suggesting possible motives for God's allowing the evil that we see. Now, it would be foolish for me to try to go through theodicies here, but in a nutshell, all theodicies involve some idealized version of the Prime Directive. Everybody who replies to the problem of evil is saying something like God is non-interfering for good reasons, and perhaps does make some exceptions, but only in certain cases. So this is essentially an idealized version of the Prime Directive. So just remember my core definition: benevolent non-interference with principled exceptions. But it's governed by a perfectly wise and infinitely capable being. And so the idea is that God, even this God with all knowledge and all power and perfect goodness, might have reasons to allow beings to develop on their own. What might those reasons be? The core reason is autonomy, that God, for some reason, values that humans do things on their own. There's been various speculations about why God might value autonomy, or in what circumstances God might value autonomy. In particular, things like mutual love, right? As we're becoming very rapidly capable of building AI bots that just act like whatever kind of person you want, you could perhaps put it in a really hot robot body, and it could act like a lover. You might think, that's not really a lover because you programmed it. This is actually just some weird, elaborate form of masturbation, right? That actually, in order for it to count as a real loving relationship, the other has to be autonomous in some important way. There's also the idea of moral growth. If God wants us to have the capacity to live according to our own values, then we might need to be able to choose minimally between better and worse options, and perhaps between good and evil. If we do that, then the moral quality of that is chosen by us. It is ours. It is autonomous choice in the moral space. And this could lead to various kinds of ownership of accomplishments, right? It is my moral character because God allowed me to develop it. It is my creative output because God didn't do it. God allowed me to do it. And so that creates this space of accomplishment that I get to play some role in. And you could imagine why even an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good being might want to allow parties to have that kind of autonomy. So the claim is, even a perfectly wise and infinitely capable being has reasons like this to allow parties to develop on their own. Now this doesn't mean that he doesn't ever have to do anything, or it doesn't have to do anything. Such a being would know exactly when and how to interfere. So there might be, in certain strategic moments, which God would know exactly when they were, a thing that God could do to help in some important way. But let's just assume that we're dealing with beings that are not that. They're not all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good. Let's keep perfect goodness, but let's get rid of the other two things. Let's assume that these parties are limited in some way. They have limited understanding and limited power. So we're going to keep this baseline idea of the prime directive, but instead of it being governed by God, it's going to be governed by wise but limited beings. What kind of motivations might they have for operating according to some kind of a prime directive? Well, all the same ones that were there before, but in addition to that, there's other things like respect for diversity. So they might think, well, because we are limited and we only have our ways of being, if we allow these beings to exist, there could be all kinds of interesting new things, new values, new creativities that could happen if we leave them alone. This would, of course, lead to new kinds of innovations, right? Maybe they will invent something. Maybe they will figure out science. Maybe they will create some new kind of art that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to see if we let them do their thing. And there's also concerns about self-sufficiency. So, like, for instance, if they always came in to help us, then you might think, well, we would become dependent on that, and we wouldn't try to take care of ourselves, and maybe they don't want that. Maybe they want us to be able to deal with some of our problems on our own. Given realistic limitations, even the most altruistic parties have strong reasons to let others deal with their own stuff, right? So there's all kinds of reasons, all these kinds of reasons, when they might just say, well, we are, in addition to the God kinds of reasons, our limited reasons also provide us with, I said reasons a lot, reasons to follow the prime directive. Such beings would at least sometimes know when and how to interfere, however. We don't have to imagine that they would always be hands-off. So, for instance, when there are existential threats, like if they thought, for instance, that a missile was launching an active warhead when it was actually launching a dummy warhead, they might have reasons to intercept and shoot it down. They might have reasons to intervene in long-term irreversible harms, like large-scale environmental degradation. All right, I just want to make a quick, very, very quick pass over some lessons that we've learned from U.S. foreign policy. Well, we didn't learn these at first because at the end of World War II, we got involved, we took out the Germans and we took out the Japanese, and then we got involved in their reconstruction, and then the Germans and the Japanese turned into these amazing global citizens with booming economies, and so we thought, we could probably just keep doing that. Everywhere we see things that we don't like. And this is what we've learned in a nutshell. Authoritarian regimes are bad. Even in the United States. And toppling authoritarian regimes does create power vacuums. If you just go in and take out some authoritarian leader, then you create this problem where no one's really in charge, and various parties rise up to take the power, and that goes unpredictably. Bad stuff happens in power vacuums. And so the best devolved policy, you might think, is benevolent non-interference, and this seems to be, in fact, the trajectory of U.S. foreign policy. It's not exactly consistent, but this does seem to be this lesson that we are at least beginning to learn. And you can imagine that the neighbors, if they've had longer periods of time, long enough time to develop interstellar space travel or transdimensional travel or whatever, that they might have had enough experiences, either within their own community or as they've engaged other species, that they basically just realize that all things considered, the best thing to do is leave people alone and let them develop on their own. So I want to suggest that this is a real live hypothesis. For all we know, the neighbor's current behavior is compatible with a wise but limited attempt to respect the prime directive. Do we see them intervening in various ways? Yes. Could you imagine that according to their value systems, they are intervening only when it's really important to do so? Yeah. And then for the most part, they're just doing their own thing and letting us do our own thing, although keeping an eye on things to see if anything goes particularly bad, according to what they would consider to be particularly bad. So here's just in a nutshell this prime directive argument. I want to suggest that we actually have pretty good reasons for thinking that something like the prime directive is in fact operative. So we don't observe complete indifference. They are doing stuff. They're flying over to sea. They're talking to the children in Zimbabwe. They're abducting people and putting things in their bodies. There are lots of exploitable resources on Earth, but we don't observe unchecked or competitive exploitation. That is, we don't just see one party just constantly exploiting, and we don't see multiple parties fighting to exploit. For the most part, we're seeing non-exploitative. We aren't powerful enough to prevent our own exploitation. If these things can turn off our missiles and our fighter jets and fly in and out of places, they can do whatever they want. So it's not like we're stopping them. What do you mean Kevin Newt was talking earlier about how we've shot at them? It is true, apparently, that when we've seen them, we've shot at them. They have very little to worry about with regard to our shooting at them. They could basically do whatever they want. So I think we can conclude that whoever the influential NHI are, or the kind of the beings that have the most collective power, are promoting or defending our interests in some way. We don't observe widespread assistance. There's still a lot of war and disease and natural disasters and things like that that they don't mess with, so the prime directive is operative. Now you might think, really? But those abductions seem not very prime directively, and those cattle mutilations don't seem very prime directive-y, and those crop circles and stuff. Really? Are we seeing a prime directive suggestion? Yes, just not an entirely consistent one. And in fact, if you look at the Star Trek universe itself, I did this when I was doing research for this talk, especially in Star Trek, the original series. Literally every time the prime directive came up, Kirk violated it. It was taken much more seriously in The Next Generation and various other Trek stories, Trek shows and movies and stuff after that. But it's quite possible that there is a prime directive that is in play, that is explaining a lot of our behavior, but it's just being implemented inconsistently. So again, benevolent non-interference with principled exceptions, but now governed by flawed and limited being. So the motivations they might have are all the ones God might have, all the ones good ones might have, but also selfishness, greed, pride, etc. Right? There's no particular reason to think that those aren't also in play. There's simply no reason at all to presume that the neighbors represent a single, unified group with cohesive aims. After all, we, all alone on our little planet, the only large-scale rational agents, we are not what we know of until the whales turn out to be deep philosophers, which I desperately hope is true. Right? There's simply no reason at all to think that there is only one group that has an agenda. It is much more likely that there are many groups, even among one species or one type, that have different values expressed in different ways, and there might be different types of beings. There might be, oh my gosh, you understand how big and broad and diverse this might be. Some parties do, however, seem to be following and enforcing a prime directive, but other parties might embrace more interference-friendly value systems, either exploitative types or busybody types, and apparent inconsistencies might just be inconsistent. Sometimes people look at these hypotheses and they're like, well, it doesn't look like they're behaving like that. Yeah, it's just inconsistent. Like we're dealing with a whole bunch of things, with a whole bunch of different kinds of agendas, and actually, suggestion, what we're seeing is exactly what we should expect. What we're seeing is not surprising at all. So let me give you my big conclusion, and then I'm going to extrapolate 3 punchlines, and then I'll stop talking. The conclusion of everything I've said so far is that the neighbors seem to be working to promote and defend our interests. If there are exploiters, they are being largely held in check. What follows from this? As I say, I'm going to give you 3 implications. The first one is this. Our default attitude should be caution. We're dealing with beings that are way different from us and seem to have much more power than we do. But not terror. There's nothing to be terrified of here. Whatever they would be doing that would be harmful to us, they would already be doing. Now, is the world a wonderful place? No. So might they be doing some terrible things? Yes. But this seems like it's the worst case scenario. Now, on the other hand, there's this other group that we need to think about, at least briefly. Let's say that we believe in the neighbors. But we also, I hope, believe in the U.S. government. The U.S. government is definitely hiding something substantial. Here are a bunch of people whose testimony I take very seriously. I've already talked about Lou Elizondo, but David Grush testified before House Oversight last summer. Christopher Mellon was working with Elizondo on the 2017 stuff. Carl Nell is a U.S. Army colonel. Tim Gallaudet is a U.S. Navy Rear Admiral. They are saying very provocative things about what is known internal to the U.S. government. And what I find puzzling right now is how dismissive most people... This room is not full. And it's not full because most people think that these topics are not worth engaging, but claim they are obviously worth engaging for the following reason. I hate to say this to you, but this is a situation where you must be a conspiracy theorist. You do not have a choice to not be a conspiracy theorist. Sometimes this happens. For instance, let me give you two non-alien related examples. 9/11 is a situation where you must be a conspiracy theorist. You either believe that a conspiracy was carried out by Al-Qaeda or by George Bush. The George Bush conspiracy would be a meta-conspiracy. That is a conspiracy for you to believe that a different conspiracy happened that didn't. So this is one of these situations where you must choose between a conspiracy or a meta-conspiracy. You do not have a choice to be a non-conspiracy theorist in a situation like this. Another very potent and very relevant situation is the 2020 election. Either there was a conspiracy by Joe Biden and friends to steal the election, or there is a meta-conspiracy by Donald Trump to make you believe that there was a conspiracy by Joe Biden for other reasons. You cannot avoid being a conspiracy theorist here, right? One party or the other is conspiring. This is a situation just like that. They are all alleging that there is a conspiracy, that the U.S. government has known about, recovered alien craft, encounters with beings like the stuff we've been talking about, that UFOs are real, that some of them are created by non-human intelligences that have been engaging us in the ways described. They claim there's a conspiracy. Either that conspiracy exists, or they are conspiring to make us believe that there is such a conspiracy. There's either a conspiracy or a meta-conspiracy. And you could believe in the meta-conspiracy, that's fine. People do believe in the meta-conspiracy. Why are they doing this? It's a psyop, right? They're trying to cover up something else. They're trying to cover up some secret military project or something like that. Okay, sure, fine. You have to be the government is hiding something, right? It's either aliens or something else. But we know for sure that something important is being hidden. Now look, between you and me, I think they're telling the truth. And if you think to yourself, well, gosh, come on, doesn't that mean that Barack Obama would get briefed on that? And doesn't, for heaven's sake, doesn't that mean that Donald Trump would get briefed on that? And they're not acting like they know. Oh, yeah, they are. So what you need to do is go watch the interview where James Corden asks Barack Obama point blank, what's going on with the aliens? And what he said, he makes this uncomfortable-looking face. And then he says straight up, first thing out of his mouth, there are things about the aliens that I cannot tell you. That is a direct quote. Go look it up, watch the interview, and then watch him deflect and make a joke around it. 2 weeks ago, on the Gutfeld show, someone point blank asked Donald Trump, are there aliens at Area 51? And what he said was, I don't know. But I can tell you that I was briefed by U.S. Air Force pilots who were so hot, it was very strange. Okay, right? And what they told me is that they were flying F-22s, and they engaged a flying saucer, and it went away at 4 or 5 times their max speed. He said that a couple of weeks ago. I cannot tell you how many times my academic colleagues, when I talk to them about these things, have made the following argument. It can't be true, because if it were true, Donald Trump would know about it, and then he would have said something about it. Okay, well, he just did. So that argument, at least, is gone. Proposal I think Grasha, Elizondo, and all those characters are just telling us the truth. But even if they're not, something else is being hidden, and it's important that we get to the bottom of it. We should not assume that U.S. government policy regarding UAP or NHI is serving the long-term interests of humanity. And this is true no matter whether it's the straightforward conspiracy or the meta-conspiracy. There seems to be this idea, I don't know, they're hiding stuff, but that's probably fine. No, don't trust the government. Let me give you a really quick lesson in history to prove to you that you should not trust the government. There was an incident in 1960 where a U-2 spy plane was flying over the Soviet Union and it crashed. We didn't want people to know that we had spy planes like that, so we were like, no worry about it, it was just a weather observation platform. And then the Russians found it, and then there were spies, and then they were like, these are spies, and then the US government had to say, okay, yeah, they were spies. Okay, so that's a situation where they directly lied to the public, explicitly and directly lied to the public to cover up a secret program. There was, of course, the Manhattan Project, which was used to develop the atom bomb. Go watch Oppenheimer. One of the things that involved was direct oversight of Congress being diverted. They acted in such a way, they moved money in such a way that they could spend hundreds of millions, billions of dollars developing a bomb without Congress knowing about it. So we also know that they will avoid congressional oversight of secret programs. That's fine. They're still just doing the good stuff, defending the freedom. Not always. There have been some really nasty cases, like in the civil rights movement. They were using illegal wiretapping and various other really terrible things to undermine various groups in the civil rights movement. So they will do things that are illegal in those secret programs. Well, you know, maybe they're illegal, but they're not immoral. They were still just doing their best to try to make the world a better place. Then there was MKUltra, where they, without consent, gave people LSD and psychologically tortured them to try to make them have psychic capacities. I understand how wacky that sounds, but that did happen. You can question whether psychic capacities are real, that's fine. But this is a historical fact, right? And you might think then that they've been shown to do horrific things when allowed to keep secrets without proper oversight. And of course, let's not forget the whole climate change catastrophe, which we've known about early models since 1896. It was first kind of proposed that dumping this much CO2 into our atmosphere was a bad idea. Since at least 1959, we've had pretty good models indicating that we're headed in a pretty dangerous direction. And what have we done about it? Basically nothing. You should not trust the government. They have proven that they will sacrifice our long-term interests for short-term gain, and worse than that. For short-term gain of their donors, the Bush family, for instance, who kind of derailed a lot of the early climate stuff, were oil tycoons, right? It was very much in their interests to make sure that the current policy on the environment stays the same. So yeah, you shouldn't trust the government. So we need to demand UAP disclosure. If there's aliens, we deserve to know. If there's not aliens, they're hiding something else, and we need to get to the bottom of this. Things like the UAP Disclosure Act will force them, one way or the other, to tell us what's going on. One more thing, and now's when I get to pick on Lou. I like Lou, but I'm going to pick on him. Spies, soldiers, and politicians cannot be allowed to handle first contact. This is an interview, in my view, the best interview to give your friends if you want them to start taking seriously what's going on. It was done with Lou Elizondo on The Daily Show with one of my favorite hosts on that show, Ronnie Chang. I'm just going to show you a clip from this video.
And let's say you lock your windows and you turn on your alarm. Let's say one Sunday morning you come downstairs to have a hot cup of coffee or tea, and despite your doors being locked and your window and your alarm on, there's now size 12 muddy boot prints in your living room floor, in your carpet that weren't there the night before. Now, no one's been hurt, nothing's out of place, but despite you doing all this other stuff and locking doors and making sure the alarm's on, there are now footprints in your living room carpet that weren't there the night before. My question to you is that a threat? And so my response is, from a national security perspective, I was wearing my national security hat, it could be if it wanted to be, so we probably should figure out how it's getting into the house.
We should probably move at that point. We should probably get out of that apartment. There's boot prints. They're still walking around.
All right. Lou's a spy. He's trained to not trust people, and he's trained to not be trustworthy. I actually, again, trust him for reasons we could discuss when he says these things are happening. But I don't trust his instincts when he's looking at the behavior of the neighbors and acting like this, right? It could be a threat if it wanted to be, so it should probably figure out how it's getting in the house. And then just look at how Ronnie Chang responded. Fear, right? This is just a fear mongering. And this is bad, and I just wanted to suggest that this analogy that he gives, while interesting, is not helpful. Imagine if you come into your living room after you've locked your doors and there's 20 footprints, but nothing else bad happened. And then you do that again, and again, and again, for 80 years. It's really weird, and it probably is worth trying to figure out how they're getting in the house. To a not threat. They've spent 80 years doing whatever they're doing. It doesn't seem to be a threat. This is one of my favorite novels in science fiction. It's called Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. And I think this is yet another time when our speculative fiction can provide us with some actual real-world insight. In Childhood's End, the Independence Day scenario happens. Large motherships appear over every city. But unlike in Independence Day, they don't blow anything up. What do? Nothing. They just sit there for weeks, months, years, until everybody realizes they're not a threat. And then they reveal themselves. Suggestion, this is at least a decent hypothesis of what's actually been going on for the past 70, 80 plus years. Now look, I like these guys, but I do not want them to be the only people thinking about this. Might there be serious national security implications? Yeah, again, we're dealing with, in my view, lots of things, probably acting consistently. Might there be some exploiters who we need to keep track of and maybe shoot down? Sure, I want some intelligence people in the room. But I don't want only intelligence people in the room. I want peacemakers in the room. I want people who care about nonviolence and understanding each other. Just one example, Malala. She's not been briefed, I bet. She should be. Furthermore, it's really bad that apparently the United States is making these decisions for the whole human species, the whole planet. That's sad. All of humanity needs to be involved in our journey toward open contact. I have a little group. We're calling ourselves the Visible College. What we're trying to do is collect academics and other scholars in other fields, working scholars, for instance, not all academically minded people waste their time in academia. It's not like going through other things. Trying to think about what's going on. There's a lot of focus right now in the UAP community on the science stuff. Yay, science. Let's use science to figure out what's going on. But there's a bunch of other stuff going on. How is this going to impact us as humans? How is this going to impact our value systems, our religions, and all those kinds of things? And we're really not thinking enough about this. How do I know? Because I've spoken to the UAP caucus, and I said, hey guys, what are the issues that you're worried about? And the issues that they're worried about are all legal stuff, right? You can tell because when you look at the UAP Disclosure Act, they have foreign policy and domestic policy people, they have scientists and economists and historians and sociologists, but no psychologists, no religious studies people, no philosophers. This is bad. This is very bad. Again, we do not want spies and soldiers and politicians negotiating first contact. We do want them in the room. I'm not saying we don't want them in the room, but it needs to be a bigger room. And what we're trying to do is make the room a little bigger. These are my punchlines. I hope that you find these helpful. Thanks for hanging out.